It is estimated that the average woman will spend over 40,000 rands over her lifetime purchasing sanitary pads and tampons. And this staggering figure is set against an economy and poverty rates such as those that we see in South Africa, and it becomes a harsh reality for those who've got to live with this fact. Having recently presented a policy document to Parliament opposing the tax currently still placed on sanitary items, award-winning health reporter at the Mail and Guardian's Bhekisisa desk is Pontsho Pilane, who joins us to tell us why tampons should not be taxed. Pontsho, pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me, Tim.
And much appreciated. Well, this is an ongoing discussion. It's been happening for some time, and there are different community organizations that have sprung up and individuals who've taken the initiative of providing young school children with and who need sanitary pads with sanitary pads, right? When it comes to the tax side of things, I suppose government thinks that you are stretching things too far.
Well, so my presentation to Parliament, the proposal was not just about exempting sanitary products from a tax. It was to also come up with a policy, a sustainable policy for longer term use on how government is going to provide free sanitary products for poor people who menstruate.
Sure.
And so, however, I think the tampon tax, as we call it, is an easier way of starting the discussion because we already know that products that are taxed are the ones that are considered luxury items. Things like bread and mealie meal are not taxed because they're considered essential items by Treasury, right? So why is a tampon or why is a pad considered to be a luxury item when people do not choose to menstruate?
Agreed. I understand that at least it's a start of sorts, right? But, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Somebody might say, but we've always lived with this reality, with this fact. So what changed recently for new considerations to be added to how tampons are taxed?
So I think saying that we've always lived with the reality is not a good enough reason. The thing that is missing, not only in South Africa, but in global policy making procedures is a very feminist approach to policy making. So a lot of the times, the person that is in the minds of people, policymakers, when they make policies, is not a woman. A woman is not considered, or people who are not male are not considered in policy making in many governments. So a feminist approach to policy making will make room for things like tampon tax to be considered and to be exempt, like for tampons to be exempted from that when we have a feminist approach to thinking, when we do not just think from what we call masculine modes of thought.
So in a sense, meaning that sanitary pads, tampons are not a matter of choice. This is what women have to live with anyway, so it must be factored in, that reality.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's, if a joke that I usually make is that if men menstruated, definitely we would get tampons and pads for free from many governments in the world. So it goes back to the fact that when policies are being drafted, we do not think about people beyond a very masculine and a very patriarchal sense of how the world looks like. So even governments across the world who have been refusing to drop the tax on sanitary products, it shows that there are not maybe enough women in rooms to have these discussions with. I mean, when we look at the stats right now, when we look at who's at the top of governance in states and in governments, it still remains to be men. But this discussion is coming to the table now, particularly in South Africa and across the world, because more women are making it into positions of power and influence, and then they're starting these discussions.
I always like to compare what's going on or learn from other countries, and I know for sure that South Africa also has got a lot to teach other parts of the world. Are there examples where taxes on sanitary pads have been done away with in the world?
Yes.
Or where they are provided for free?
Yes, not provided for free, but where there is no tax on sanitary products. For example, I like using Kenya as an example because it is also a developing country. And even further, it's an African country. Kenya does not have a tax on these products. And a lot of arguments that are being brought forward by particularly also governments, treasury, like people that work in the finances in government departments is that, well, Kenya does not have a pension fund or social grant on the same level as South Africa. This is very true. But if a country that is not on the same economic level as South Africa, such as Kenya, can drop the tax, why can't we with a more stable economy, with a more sustainable way of taking care of our people?
And do you find that more women are agitating for this, for taxes to be done away with in South Africa? In other words, are they awake to the fact, and are they mobilizing women in our nation at this time?
I think a lot of women, particularly young women like myself, are mobilizing against this. For example, earlier this year at Wits University, some female students got together and had handed over a memorandum to the Vice Chancellor, Adam Habib, around how the university should provide free sanitary pads, because if there are students who are struggling to feed themselves at university and who are on student loans or NEFSAs to pay for their fees, what is happening when it comes to their personal hygiene, for example, menstruation. So these students, this group of students, particularly led by young black women, were asking the university and demanding for a university to come up with a policy where they will supply sanitary pads for students at the university.
And I suppose the much more pressing need as well is amongst young women who live in poverty-stricken areas or who come from poverty-stricken backgrounds. Do you sense that there's movement towards providing free sanitary pads to such women in South Africa?
So in my research for the proposal that I presented yesterday in Parliament, one thing that I acknowledged South Africans and government for doing is that there are various different initiatives to provide sanitary pads for poor people. For example, we know of the Discam 1 million campaign that happens every year where Discam consumers buy pads as they go into the shop to buy other stuff. There's also different CSI projects by different private sectors and particularly banks, from what I've seen in my research. And also, for example, the Gauteng Health Department has done donations across the province to provide pads. However, the provision of pads in this very scattered, uncoordinated manner is a thing that I was saying should be done away with. There should be a streamlined process, coordination, and that needs policies, and there needs the buying in of departments of health, social development, so we make sure that we're not only providing sanitary pads for example, learners who are in schools in poor areas, but we're also providing for people who have already left school. So what happens, if we give a learner, let's say, a pack a month or 2 packets of pads a month, and they take it home to a household where they are not the only ones who menstruate, what will happen to that packet? The biggest reason to want to provide the pads is so that learners stay in school. But if they're going into households where they have to share with 3 or 4 other people, we are not meeting.
Well, for people who don't live with that experience on a day-to-day, right? What is it that, if you were to share some information with men to appreciate the difficulties or the challenge of having to go through your daily life without sanitary pads, what is it that we need or men need to appreciate or understand about this problem?
So at Bhekisisa, when I did the video about why should we do away with tampon tax in South Africa, many men were replying and commenting on the video saying very ridiculous things like, it's only natural. Why should this be a problem? I think the first issue that we need to address is the fact that we need to destigmatize menstruation and talking about it from the time there are children in the house. Perhaps maybe the basic education department must think of ways on how to actively destigmatize menstruation and other puberty experiences that women particularly go through to make it less of the stigma and taboo topic. So I think the biggest issue is that menstruation is considered to be a dirty thing that happens to women.
I suppose that's where, you know, the whole education should start, right?
Yes.
And we've got to change our mindsets. And your presentation to Parliament, how was it received?
A lot of the MPs that were present, they said that they were very happy. They welcomed the presentation. They said that I informed them about things that they didn't know before. However, like from my experience of being there, I realized that the different parliamentary members, they are trying a lot to make this happen. And I think a better coordinated relationship between departments of Treasury, DTI, Health, Basic Education, Higher Ed, and Social Development needs to happen in order to take this issue further and for us to actually see implementation happen. I think much like many other policies in South Africa, we really have brilliant ideas and policies, but we really fail at implementation. And I believe that the only reason that free sanitary pads will not happen in this country is if the government fails at implementing.
Are you having a conversation about this at Bhekisisa at all? Because I'd like some of our viewers to continue with the conversation.
Definitely. I have written a few articles on sanitary pads, why it's important to provide sanitary pads, why it's important to provide to get rid of the tampon tax.
Yes.
And I'll be writing a review of my experience in Parliament tomorrow, and it will be up on our website.
Okay, then she's Pontsho Pilane is a writer with Bhekisisa, part of the Male and Guardian Initiative, Health Initiative. We also encourage you to participate in the conversation. Write to us. What are your views? Should taxes be taken off tampons? You think, you agree or disagree? Tell us. And should they be provided for free to members of poverty-stricken communities? Would like to hear your views. The address is tonight@modise.tv and also opinion at Tim Modise.